Mediterranean along the Rhine when the Romans had control of that area. And we find, in fact, there's some examples from Cologne here from the Museum of Cologne, earthenware and pottery from the 1st and 2nd century AD that was produced in and around Rhine. And funnily enough is that the Romans at the time actually were pretty good at producing pottery. They've been doing it for quite a while, and the designs that we've seen here from the 1st century look a lot more modern and well-made than the stuff you see here. That's because it was in a time period of progression during the Dark and Middle Ages, which is where we're going to start. So these particular pieces here are known as proto-stoneware. The suffix proto meaning foremost or first. They're not quite true stoneware. They're actually a high-fire earthenware. And for those of you who don't know the difference between true stoneware and earthenware, is that earthenware is fired at a lower temperature, can't withstand higher temperatures, and it's still porous. It can still absorb liquids, and over time, if you're using it as a storage vessel or even a drinking vessel, it will eventually putrefy. So, in Langerway, Cologne, Drehhaus, all these small areas in and around the Rhine, you start to see this material pop up, proto-stoneware. And it was just getting to the point where they were slightly vitrified, but not quite enough, so they still required glaze. The glaze was a very simple iron wash, which is consisting of iron oxides and brown clay slips that they would dip the vessel in. Most of the time, just the interior was covered with this because they weren't really worried about the exterior. This is a great example of that, where you can see where they put the washing and poured it out, and you just got a little bit coming around the outside of there. But if you look at the inside, the entire inside of this vessel is glazed with very, very primitive glaze. These were clays that were not very filtered, meaning there's a lot of impurities, a lot of organic impurities, and a lot of things that prevented that vitrification process from happening. It wasn't until they started to find better clay deposits in and around Rhine, particularly around Stoneware, that they were able to find clay suitable enough and with enough silica or silicates in it, particularly quartz and feldspar, that were added to the clay, and when it would fire, those small pieces or particles would melt and fuse together, basically creating your own glaze on the interior, and that sealed the vessel entirely. These vessels here for Stoneware, you can see that the clay is a really very fine white buff color. That's because it's a very pure, fat clay. These clays have a lot of iron content. That's why they look brown. Iron equals brown. Less iron, you can fire them and they come out a nice soft color like this. But it also has to do with kiln atmosphere. Oh, sorry. I'm actually already there. Yeah.
You ready?
Is that better?
So kiln atmosphere played a big role in how vessels came out fired. Reduction fire is when you take the kiln atmosphere and you starve it of oxygen. What happens at that point is all the oxygen molecules and everything organic will have oxygen molecules attached to it pretty much, will then get borrowed by the flames, and it will prevent it from turning this brown color. It actually stays this nice, pure white color. I don't think that they knew the science behind it back then. They really just said, well, that seems to work well. And as kiln technology moves forward, they were able to seal kilns better and find better refractory materials to build kilns out of. And that may be the biggest component to being able to make true stone that occurred in Germany. Kaolin, which is a type of surface clay, is a very high refractory material, very resistant to heat. And a lot of the bricks and stones that they used to build the kiln were made of that material, and allowed the kiln to get up to around 2,200 to 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is incredibly hot. Anything past that would end up with melted and deformed vessels. I don't have an example of one here. I wish I did. I do have one at home, I forgot it. But anything past that, the vessels would start to collapse or melt in on themselves. So it was a very delicate process of getting back 100 to maybe even touching over another 75 degrees temperature range to be able to know, okay, let's start quenching, let's start bring the temperature down. They did that by actually using small test pieces of clay at a little sample site in front of the kiln where they could open it up one brick and look at the color. If it was a nice hot wet color, they knew they were getting close to full fire. At that time, in certain factories, they would add salt to the kiln because that was when it would vaporize at its highest temperature. Seabird didn't really use a lot of salt. We do see it sparsely, but mostly unsalted methods in Seabird, and they actually have quite a nice texture to them. It's a very sandy, fine texture. In fact, I encourage you to come up afterwards and feel some of them because there's a clear difference between vessels that are salt glazed and ones that aren't. These particular pieces here were made in Rouen. Rouen was well, now it's a mountain in Belgium, but it was in and along that whole Rhineland central region where we see that first pottery start to come out of, or stoneware. And what's interesting is that, okay, I want to hold my phone. So stylistically, there's not much that changes from this point to this point. Does everybody agree with that? This is about 400 years older than this vessel is. So there was a stagnation in artistic form in ceramics in Germany at the time. It really didn't change much because stoneware wasn't viewed as something that the wealthy used. They didn't use it. They used porcelain, they used glass, they used metal. They used all these other mediums that really were suitable to them, so there was no influx of money to really say, well, let's make these look better. It was strictly utilitarian. And we see that during the later Renaissance, well, in Europe, the Renaissance really started around the 1400s and up until about the 17th century, so 1600. And we see a very slight change, a slight refinement in form. If I were to take these two vessels and hold them up and cover the feet, this one's a bit more reduction fine, so you get a nice white color, but they're made in the same place. This one was in an oxidized atmosphere, so it looks brown. But if I were to cover the feet, you'd see the forms from the neck down are pretty much the same. But the foot has now become a nice, refined, sort of rounded off foot instead of this hand-applied pinched foot, which we see in a lot of period artwork at the time, peasants and weddings dancing and drinking out of these vessels. And this is really the very beginning of some sort of refinement in design. And then things take off very quickly, very fast. This is about 1530, 1540. But by about 1560 in Seabird, they're starting to produce things like this, which are far more sophisticated. And this is probably one of the earliest examples of using stoneware in Germany to catch up with the time and become part of the Renaissance era. The transition into the Baroque period happens very rapidly in and around 1600. So stoneware is a late medium, as I said, as far as coming into the Renaissance and being artistically, I guess, on par with what we're seeing in Europe at the time, especially out of Italy. This is another example of a round vessel that has a nice refined example of a foot. And now we're going to move into the Baroque period, which is in and around this section. I'm sorry that these overlap. These are actually part of the earlier section. So timeline-wise, just real quick recap. This is a 12th century vessel here. Now we're getting in and around the 14th and 15th centuries, 6th, and then we're getting into the 16th and 17th centuries as we go along this way. So this is 17th century. This is from Westmore. And you can see that the Baroque form is really like in full force here. Everything's just rococo and design and masks that are Romanesque in their nature. And this period lasts for quite a while, all the way up until about the 1660s, 1670s, when we see a drop off. And we start to see more designs like this, which are simplified, but still beautiful in their own way. And this is really when I find German stoneware is going to really come into its own stylistically. This is when a lot of the influence from other countries and other areas, or what the time were calling for, started to wane, and they said, well, let's start to make some designs of our own. Let's get rid of like the Romanesque sort of feel, the very Baroque, and let's start to make vessels that what you could say could be middle class. There really wasn't a middle class at the time, but there was starting to be. There was starting to be a group of people that wanted nicer looking things in their homes or for their use, and that's what we find as we start to move into the early 18th century, late 17th century. This piece, it's called the Sternberg, so it's like a little star on the front. It's compass drawn, so they would use a small compass tool to mark out their area of decoration and apply all the small sprigs. And notably, one thing I did want to say was, you'll notice the lack of lids up until this point. These can, and some did have lids, some never had a lid. These never had lids. And this was in and around when the modern clay was at its peak. So it really squashes the whole clay theory, because you never find vessels of this nature, of this age, with a lid. I've maybe seen one that Peter Votag, that I do have a picture of, that had a 14th century lid applied to it. That, like I said, even in museum collections worldwide, you just never see this stuff later. So that's just a little side note there. But I'm going to have a lot of lids on all. So yes, now like I said, we're moving out of the Baroque period into the late 18th century, early 18th century, and we're starting to find German stoneware. So a lot of these pieces you can see in Dutch Golden Age paintings. They were exported widely throughout Europe because at this time, Germany was the only shop in town. They were the only ones that made true stoneware. The next country to actually make true stoneware after Germany was in England. And their stuff was very, very iron-rich, always brown, not production fired, far less attractive than you would see coming out of the West Wall with these beautiful cobalt manganese decorations. For those of you who know manganese, that's the small purple accents that you would find on those signs from this period. And cobalt is the blue. So as we go further, things start to actually simplify. I think it's more or less quantity at this time, because they're starting to supply vast quantities of signs. I really think it came down to just production being put out too much and too fast, so they started to simplify and make things that are not less beautiful in my opinion, that's subjective obviously, but just simpler to make. So this is a simple and sized decoration that is then filled with cobalt blue, and there's no applied sprigs. So now you have matrix cutters and mold cutters that really aren't doing a lot of work. That would have been making all of these small molds to attach to these pieces. As we move a little further up, we're seeing export into England, which has been going on for quite some time. This one has a cycle of George III or George. This might be George I or II. Has stylised the way it's a little nicer than this period, which is certainly George III, which is a lot less simple, especially in the details of the cipher. You'll see that if you come up and take a look at it. But even in colonial America, a lot of this stuff is being sent over in vast quantities. There actually is not a single colonial site in America that's been excavated archaeologically that is void of Western wall shards. It's 100% of the colonial sites that have been professionally excavated that have pieces of Western wall pottery. American stoneware this time is almost non-existent. We don't see American stoneware hit until about the 1780s, 1790s, and a lot of the first pottery centers in America were here in New York, East Coast, New York, New Jersey, and most of them were immigrant potters from the rest of the region that came and showed things how to do it there. And it's why a lot of the blue, cobalt, reduction fire, gray stoneware that you see, that a lot of times in Utica you see it, even going much later, is normally attributed to German potters that came and showed the technology. In fact, this piece here is funny because this is from my hometown of Woodbridge, New Jersey. It was made by a Fulton pottery company in New Jersey, and it has this great cobalt script decoration. When I hold it in my hands, I just know that it was the foundation of all of this work going back to the 12th century in Germany that actually started or laid out the foundation for the work to be able to create vessels like this that we had even up until 100 years ago. And even today, we find people still making stuff like this and using the technology that started at this time. I don't know that there's many people in the United States that collect this sort of ware, but I think just as a collector of early stoneware that people should be more open to adding to their collection, because this is the true history of it. Back here, these are the real survivors. The fact that they're still here is incredible. A lot of them are excavated pieces, including this one and this one, which were found in pottery in Pennsylvania. Actually, by a good friend of mine, I was going to in Germany a lot. He actually physically found it in that pottery, which is also nice to know that I talked a lot. But yeah, I just wanted to share this small timeline of things that maybe you had never seen before, or knew that were German. I don't know if there's any people in the room that would have looked at this and said, oh, that's early German story. But feel free to ask any questions or come up and, yeah, hey.
So as you know, we have an early collection of Stoneware. And when people come to our house, we say, yeah, we collect beer signs. And they see our collection. And we do, by the way, we do tend to go for smaller things because we don't have a lot of space. But it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of large beer signs around. And we're like, oh, they're so small. So is it because the big ones broke, or people didn't drink out of big vessels? Or
Well, yeah, I think it would just come down to basic ergonomics. You know, just be what's comfortable in hand. Nobody wanted to hold a 4-liter vessel to the person would drink out. Show certain vessels
right,
or larger.
like the one
Yeah, this one.
I mean, if somebody says, oh yeah, beer's fine, they're gonna think that's sort of the volume that they're thinking about.
Yeah, I think they think about half liter, 1 liter stuff. Yeah, those are most of
Like
them.
more like a 1 liter.
Yeah.
So is it, so maybe the vessels got larger, you know, you got beer bottles or whatever.
Well, there were definitely during the Baroque period, I actually marked off. When you come up, please feel free to look through these books. It's fantastic. They call it the Yellow Bible in the Stoneware groups, and basically I marked off with R or these vessels that are relevant to the late Renaissance and the Baroque period, to just give you a sense of how the artistic nature of these vessels evolved over time. And some of these are presentation vessels or even vessels that gild. If you were to become a master potter in a guild at the time, you actually have to go through several tests, not far off from pewter guilds, and they would build these master vessels to show their skills and present to the guild for acceptance. So you see some of these in here, grandiose, giant, 20-liter vessels that are wood.
We have plenty of time. I want to inject 3 things I want you to talk about.
Sure.
The evolution of the styles, which you touched upon,
Yes.
on regional differences. Because the plain things in the 16th
Right.
we really see the explosion, and then I want to talk about the regional differences a little bit. I want you to touch on condition and how acceptance of collector stoneware, there's conditional
Yeah.
issues that, like a met black collector wants everything.
Sure.
I got a 400-year piece mint.
Most definitely.
And then I want you to talk about when the end of the era of stoneware production really was, classic stoneware production.
Yeah, well, classic stoneware production really started to drop off during the height of the Industrial Revolution, just like really everything else. So around 1820, 1830, things started to shift more towards what's called slip molding, which you would take a large 3-piece, 4-piece, or sometimes even more mold. You would drop clay into it and then pour it out. And the mold would then hold its shape. You have the vessel kind of just made that way. It's a little, a quick way of doing it instead of wheel throwing and decorating. So stylistically, yeah, that's kind of when that ends Industrial Revolution. And as I said, leading up to the next styles started to become very, very simple. They look at this and look at this, and it's just not there. Regions, I actually didn't bring many different regions with me today because I wanted to focus on the birthplace of stoneware in Germany, which is the Rhineland. So I have, Cologne. This is a small example from Cologne, which you can see a lot of salt glazing with. You see a lot of iron washes. They didn't really do a lot of reduction firing there because the clay just wasn't suitable for it. The less iron content, the more suitable it was to reduce and create that nice buff color, which also added to the fact that this made the perfect palette to add colors to. I think if they didn't have have these clay deposits that did fire to such a nice, beautiful gray, they probably wouldn't have started applying cobalt to vessels, because when you do in an iron-rich setting for super iron, it actually comes in a very unattractive black color. It doesn't stay this nice vibrant blue. So this was the perfect clay to use for that, and that's actually why a lot of the potters from the regions of Seaver and Brown, going closer into the 17th century, started to migrate to the West World, because not only was the clay better suited, there were more clay deposits, and there was also political war and all these other, reasons for them to migrate over time. We're talking areas over hundreds of years. But the West World did have, and still today has, the largest clay deposits of its kind in the world. It's a very, very unique clay, geological. It's a whole other conversation we can have about the geology of the region. And what was that last point? It was clear. Damage. That's it. So damage, you really don't want to be picky when it comes to this stuff. Because it's just not, it's not available, it's not around. If you do find them completely intact, that's a bonus. And usually you're going to wind up paying a little more for it. This vessel is probably my favorite of the group because it's a proto-Stoneware vessel from around, I'm going to say the 12th century, that it's completely intact, no restorations at all. There's like one small mention, and for me this is one of the more incredible survivals that I do have in this small collection. This particular vessel is from a pottery dump as well. And one great mistake about it that I noticed, and if you were looking at this, you'd think, look at this damaged thing. But it's not damaged, it's still not being used by somebody. And it was thrown a little too thickly. And when clay gets thrown too thickly, it traps air. When you trap air in a kiln and you bring it up to temperature, you're going to have problems because that air wants to go somewhere. And it usually blows out or cracks the vessel. The vessel then deforms because there's just too much moisture. If you were to look at the wall of this vessel and the wall of a similar one, which I have here, you'll see that this one is about twice as thick. This one was thrown by a better potter. A better potter knew the exact height and pinch of thickness from the point on the vessel to know that's what's going to fire too much later to get through. So that's why this one deformed. So there's also small nuanced things like that in this time period that you can look at and interact with. It brings out a new portion of the hobby to really say to yourself, well, why did this happen? Oh, I don't know. And then really study the vessels for what they are. The pinched feet is also a feature that I really enjoy because a lot of the time you'll find fingerprints of the potters still impressed on that area, and that also is just a way to reconnect the history, unlike stuff that's slipped over and was barely touched by the some of the earlier depictions of these vessels being thrown, believe it or not, also had women potters. There's a very famous playing card set from the 15th century, depicting a woman potter at the wheel throwing a secret funnel beaker, sort of like this. Women were also very integral in the trade at the time, and that's probably something a lot of people didn't know as well. So yeah, don't be picky about conditioning when it comes to this stuff. Once you get to the Baroque period, the Renaissance, that's when you really want to start looking at the condition. Cracks, hairlines, small restorations, a lot of those things are very acceptable depending on the rarity of the vessel. Don't let that stuff, if you're going to start collecting early stoneware, be the thing that dictates what you put on your shelf, because that piece might come around once and once only. And if you let it go just because of a simple crack, you might make a mistake. Another thing that I find that might be unpopular in amongst collectors is I don't let pewter dictate. I don't let pewter dictate if I'm going to buy a vessel or not. If it doesn't have a lid, that doesn't bother me. Particularly on vessels like this, from the Baroque period. If I can find this incredible survivor in great condition, which all of these are, they're ceramic-wise in perfect condition, I will eventually need to find the lid that'll fit it. But if not, this looks fantastic on my shelf. It's a very important piece of German early stoneware history. And pewter, like I was talking to some collectors last night, was actually during times of war, which has very rarely been a rest. Older vessels from museums were actually taken out, the lids were ripped off of them and thrown in fires and burned for the war efforts. The museum in Berlin, most of the early Stoneware signs there don't have lids. But they were careful enough to take them off and respect the ceramics and put the ceramics back. And that might be the story with some of these that are on this table right here. There's no way of knowing, but that might be the reason why. They shouldn't be neglected just because they don't have a lid. Okay? Yeah, it's. Anybody else have a question?
Actually, I have a comment. So when you look, there's a book by author Poet Shop, and actually you told me to get that one.
Yes.
Which I'm glad, because it's online, and having it in person is way better, because the photos are excellent. Looking through that, and that book was around 19, 20, 30 years
Yes.
old, that range of time frame, it appears that a lot of the lids on those signs were actually replaced.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and so, you know, it wasn't a World War II thing.
Correct.
You know,
It was
sometimes
waited for, absolutely.
some dude back then said, hey, you know, I
Sure,
can't-
and now you have to remember, if the vessel was well loved and well used, the lid and the hinge wore out. That was the most worn part on the piece. It is not uncommon to find a piece that has a 19th century replacement lid, just because maybe a collector from now said, does this lid fit? It was replaced by the person who had it and used it and said, hey, this needs a new lid, it's a little floppy. You know, so that you'll also find replacements that kind of don't fit, but you know, that's part of the piece's story. Yeah.
The Baroque picture that you lifted up.
This
Is
one?
that when they started, notice there's the little detail on the bottom of the handle with a little flip up. Is that when they started adding a little bit more flair to the?
Yeah, that kind of started in and around there in the late Renaissance Baroque period of 1580-ish. And there was a saddle handle type that was produced in the Western Wall for a short period of time. And I think that was really just a preference of the modern. But that little curly attachment was something that started in there. There was also a pull type. There were several different types, but yeah.
Now, did that end at some period where they went back to that more utilitarian?
Yeah, so in around the 1720s, that kind of drops off, and you start to get a straight pull down like that, and that stays for a long time. That becomes this piece and this piece probably have a good, 90 to 100 years between them, and the handle attachment is almost identical. Yeah, this is the saddle handle I was talking about. It's sort of a curly cube, but it's pressed in and pushed up the handle. There's really small details from a lot of these vessels that you can look at and see the evolution over time. That's also the lubrication date. That area between 1580 and 1720. That 100-year period was all that early.
It only took seconds to do that. The powder
Oh,
to do
sure.
that, just a flick of the wrist.
That's right. Some of them were done a lot better than others. I have some that are curled up in this beautiful spiral that's like they really took their time with it, and some are just like, So, yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, great. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.